exposure to a wide variety of extremely toxic diseases, developed immunity, but then brought those diseases to the New World and basically decimated the entire population.
Right.
So this is a non-trivial event by any standard.
The Europeans, by the time they started moving out of Europe into the New World, the Europeans, they had all their diseases, but they had relative immunity to lots of respiratory diseases, turns out. And so they brought all that stuff over here and killed most of the native New World people. Yeah, great.
Because I had read that when the Pilgrims hit Plymouth, the natives were desperate to see them because they had lost so many people they couldn't harvest their crops.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a mess and continued to be a mess a long time. Yeah.
Right. So when isolated populations of human beings have come into contact in the past, the upside is the trading of cultural resources, essentially, and that can be a tremendous upside. But the downside is the exchange of infectious diseases.
That's right.
And we're caught between those two an opportunity and a catastrophe, which present themselves simultaneously.
Yes, openness and just liberalism is great. In terms of its benefits. You got interaction with lots of different kind of people, you get a bigger social network, you got a bigger mating pool, you don't care if they're different from you, you want to interact with them. And
you can innovate out of catastrophe. Yeah,
new ideas, innovations coming from the outside that you can use locally. But that'll only work under low infectious disease, because we get high infectious disease, all that out-group contact interaction will kill you. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what we've seen in the last year and a half too.
Yes, absolutely.
So
we're right in the middle of it. We're right in the middle of it. And the mortality, the human mortality from infectious disease before the pandemic was still greater than any other measured source. So there's recent work that's looked at, you can just sort of summarize it this way. You can look at genes that play known roles in human life. So there are genes associated with immunity, and those have been described by immunologists, which genes are involved. There are genes involved in diet, the genes involved in digesting protein and all that kind of stuff. All these, gene functions are known. If you look at where in the human genome there's the most turnover of new alleles, new genes, those are genes that are evolutionarily very active. It turns out that the immunity genes are the evolutionary hotspots in the human genome. And that says there's more mortality from infectious disease than from other measured problems that humans face. Most mortality still is from infectious disease. That was done at 50 sites, human sites throughout.
So that provides evidence that that's actually the worst threat facing
the worst threat
constantly.
Still, yeah.
Hence its powerful effect on such things as values.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's the main mortality factor. And if you look at the anthropological evidence about the importance of infectious disease versus other things, there's a lot of evidence for that. A nice review recently that some people did. But infectious disease is the main killer of infants and older children in the ethnographic records of traditional societies. Infectious disease is the big one. Next is infanticide. That's number 2, where parents kill their kids strategically because they can't raise them under resource limitation, or the kids are sick or whatever. Infanticide is very common. That's number 2, but infectious disease is the main killer.
So here's some radical ideas, I suppose, because reading all this, learning this. Okay, before we go there, let's do one other thing. Main objections to the theory, practical and empirical. What I read a paper recently and I'm afraid I can't cite it in detail, but it'll serve as an example, claiming that with proper control for technological development, the causal or the effect of parasite stress on political belief vanished. Now, you cite many, many papers in your books and in your papers, so I'm by no means saying that this is a canonical study, but it's very useful. This is a very, 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 very provocative theory. I mean, it upends in some sense. My sense when I first encountered it was that it upends almost everything we think about politically. And so what's the saying that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence? We've got to look at the counter evidence too. So what do you think are the main weaknesses of the idea as far as you're concerned, and how have you addressed them, and have they been successfully addressed?
Yeah, we've addressed them as they have come out, and the parasite stress theory of values has gotten, when it first came out, it got so much attention that attracted a lot of people to try to falsify it, and that's the way that works in science.
Yeah, thank God.
So we went through that phase, and now all the research is looking at very interesting spin-offs in productive ways of the parasite stress theory, and no criticisms have come out recently. But the kind of thing you're talking about, where it's really a modernity, modern things, and so forth,
right,
that controls our bad. That's an old idea in the literature that basically people just get more modern, they get more liberal, and so forth. And we take that on in a number of ways. And the one way I'd like to you might be interested in, we look at the cultural and social revolution of the 60s and 70s in the West. So what happened, and I was there, you had a liberalization of values, basically, is the bottom line. But you had more, the women's movement started then. There was a sexual revolution, same time.
Right, which AIDS put a terrible crimp in, another infectious agent.
Yeah, and ethnic groups, minority groups that had been ostracized and so forth got more attention, positive attention. There was democratization of law, voter laws, and all that changed. So it was more than just, people talk about that time as the sexual revolution time, the 60s and 70s, but really it was a much broader social revolution involving human rights, increased